Hello everyone. Today I want to talk about books. So if you don't already have coffee or tea with you, now would be a really good time to grab some. I've got some mandarin orange spice, which is one of my favorites. So today I'm not just talking about any books, but specifically the best and the worst books that I read in 2020. So let's get into it. So let's start with the positives. One of the best books I read this year is Watership Down by Richard Adams. I don't know why it took me so long to read this book because I've been meaning to for years. And I met someone who really loves this book, so that kind of convinced me, all right, let's just do it. And it's a lovely story. I mean, I know that some people find it really sad and dark and tragic, and it is dark, but that's nature. One of the coolest things about this book is the rabbit mythology that Richard Adams created for this, and I just think it's so cool because it kind of fits into the whole like Brer Rabbit stories and just any culture that has like a storytelling tradition or some kind of pantheon that relates to their own culture and society. Now, actually, I watched the miniseries, the new one. I watched it on Netflix. I think it might be BBC. I'm not sure which network does it or produced it, but I do wish that I had read the book first, just so I didn't know exactly what was going to happen. But as with many cases, the book is better. Duh. But one of the big changes that the miniseries made that I didn't like was adding like this love story arc, which was one of the things I really liked about the book, is because this is about rabbits. This is not about human romance. You know, it's not that the rabbits needed to find females because they're lonely and they would like to fall in love. It's they need to find females so they can continue the species. And that is how rabbits are. That's how animals are. So I appreciated that he didn't try to anthropomorphize their intentions and their goals in the book. And it's really a beautifully written book, and I highly recommend it, especially if you like animals or nature stories. Another of the best books that I read this year is The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. I've been wanting to read this book for a while as well. It just took me a while because I had, a long list to get through. But this is pretty good for a debut novel. I was pretty impressed because I was very much engaged with the story, and I stayed up too late reading more than once. And now obviously it's got its issues as with any like first novel. So there are some like repetition in description, like for example, every time Arden refers to a table with a lot of stuff on it, she says it groaned, like repeatedly throughout. That's the only term that is used for tables heavy with food on them or whatever. And then so there's like a little bit of those kind of things, which I imagine that she has since improved because she's put out several more books. The only other thing that I was like about was I just wish it would have been a little bit darker, like where she had just gone a little bit further with some of the themes that she approached in here. But that's just my style personally. I just like it when it doesn't feel like the author is afraid to go there, That being said, I did really enjoy the mythological aspect, the folklore in it. I mean, one of my favorite pastimes, I guess, is reading fairy tales. And I love Angela Carter as well. So that's kind of my bread and butter, is like mixing historical fiction with folklore and fairy tales and stuff like that. So this is right up my alley. And I've been learning Russian. And I've already been interested in Russia and Russian history. So this is kind of all the things that I like in one, and that's really cool. So I'm definitely going to read the other 2 books in the trilogy because I was pretty impressed with this one. Like I said, it's not like the best book I've ever read, but it was one of the best I read this year for sure. Another really great book that I read this year, I don't have my copy with me because I loaned it to a friend because that's how much I liked it. I've been telling everybody about it, and it's Perdido Street Station by China Mieville. And it was a weird book. And I know that he himself, China, says that he writes weird fiction. So it is definitely that. But it was recommended to me like several years ago by someone who was encouraging me to think outside the box in terms of what is fantasy. Because not all fantasy is like Tolkien and Game of Thrones and stuff. This is really cool, kind of twisted fantasy. And it was one of the most unique books I think I've ever read. Even like the story, like if you look at the elements within the story, yes, there's a group of people that need to stop a bad thing from happening. There is a bad guy, and then, you know, a resolution. So in that regard, yeah, okay, we've seen that before. But everything else about it, the world building, the language, the creatures, the character development, the description, everything was like so good. So I highly recommend to anyone who likes fantasy or just wants something a little different outside of their usual, because it's one I probably never would have picked up. Not because I don't like dark fantasy, because I do, but it's just, it wouldn't have been on my radar. So I'm really thankful to the person who recommended it to me. Okay, so that's it for the best books I read. Let's move to the worst books I read. And this doesn't mean that they're the worst books ever, they're just not that good in my opinion. The first book that I really did not like, I'm sorry, but it's the DaVinci Code. I know that people love this book, and so I had really high hopes, but 2 things. Okay, one thing I will say, again, I watched the movie before I read the book, so I can see how if you didn't know what was going to happen, you didn't know what the story was, this would be a really engaging read, probably a pretty quick read that you would find like gripping. So I will concede that maybe that had a large part to do with why I didn't enjoy it, because I knew exactly what was going to happen. I knew all the clues. But as a historian, I have some serious qualms with the way that these characters are supposed to have figured out this mystery. Everything is just too convenient. They just happen to figure out these really complex puzzles and riddles exactly when they need to. Like in the opening bit inside the Louvre, they suddenly realize that, oh, there's this one clue that they just need to solve before leaving, and they just happen to be on the right floor in the right wing and all this stuff of the exact painting that they need to see, and then it leads to one that's not, you know, miles away. And it's just, it feels far too convenient, and even the type of historical detective work that Langdon, the main character, is doing is just so, it's questionable. It's far-fetched. I think like I said, I may have enjoyed it more if I didn't already know what was going to happen, but it's just, it fell a little short for me. I wish that I liked it more than I do, but yeah, sorry, I didn't like it. And the last book in this list, and also one of the worst ones I read this year, The Picts, A History by Tim Clarkson. This is supposed to be like a history book. There's not a single footnote in here. I don't understand how he can put that on the cover. This is not a history book. This is, I don't even know what this is. This man has a PhD, and I don't understand how he can put out a book like this in good conscience. he doesn't cite any of his sources. We just have to take his word for it. Like, he will refer to the annals and this source says this, and he doesn't have a footnote. He doesn't have the place where he found it. I'm like, okay, which annals? Like the annals of Tigernach, the annals of Innisfallen, the annals of wherever, you know? Like, I've read these. And I'm like, okay, where are you getting this information? For some backstory on me, I recently wrote my master's dissertation partially on one of the most famous Picts, Onust, Angus, who died in 761. One of the biggest things that bothers me about this book, other than the footnotes, because that's a huge problem, that would never fly in any academic situation ever. You need to cite your sources. Speaking of sources, he's perfectly fine with taking Bede and the ecclesiastical history of the English people at face value, but he turns around a few pages later and says, when it comes to the hagiographies, like the life of Columba, you have to be really careful with those ones, because it's not a history, it's a story of miracles. And like, yeah, that's true, but at the same time, you don't think Bede is just as biased as the writers of the hagiographies? Like, if there's one thing I learned doing my dissertation and all the historical research that I'm getting really fired up, and all the historical research that I've done throughout my life, you have to be really careful making assertions about these old texts, because it is almost impossible to separate the information from the bias of the person writing it. It's just, you have to be really careful. And that's why the focus of my dissertation was less about what actually happened, like the facts of the matter, and more about what does this representation say about these cultures and about these people and how they interacted with each other. You can't take these things at face value. You really have to be careful with all of the texts, and he's just not careful enough for this to be a reputable way to learn about the Picts. If you want to learn about the Picts, I suggest James Fraser and Gilbert Marcus. They have a couple books that are better, and I do want to do a video about history books and do like a read this, not that. So this one will feature in there, and I'll probably pull up a couple of books that are better for learning about the Picts. So a little bit different from the others in this list, but I really didn't like it, and it's one that I would have taken for fact before doing my master's, so I'm trying to warn people off this book because it is not a good way to learn about the Picts. Okay, that's it for the best and worst books of 2020. Pretty short list, but you know, a lot of the books were middle of the road that I read this year. These ones were just some of the highlights, whether for good or bad. But yeah, I'm excited to start reading for 2021. I have a lot more books that I want to get through, and I might talk about that in a later video as well. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you've read any of these books, let me know what you thought of them in the comments below. Feel free to disagree with anything I've said. And yeah, let's get a discussion going. I love books. I like talking about books. So yeah, anyway, until next time.